The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and regret. Ethan Carter sat beside the bed, staring at the woman he had once believed would save his life. Willow Liu's breathing had become shallow hours ago. The machines beside her beeped in uneven rhythms, each sound slicing through Ethan's chest. Outside the private room, reporters crowded the entrance of St. Aurora Medical Center. Investors were waiting for updates. Board members were whispering about emergency succession plans. None of it mattered, not anymore. Ethan had spent 15 years building Carter Biotech into one of the most ambitious pharmaceutical companies in North America. He had sacrificed sleep, friendships, and nearly every piece of happiness he once possessed. And for what his biggest competitor had crushed him. The company was drowning in debt, his body was failing, and the woman he loved was dying. Willow slowly opened her eyes, even after years of marriage. She still looked unreal, soft black hair spread across the pillow. Pale skin illuminated by the city lights beyond the window. Ethan leaned closer. Willow, she looked at him for several silent seconds before finally speaking. "You know," she whispered weakly. "If I had continued my research back then, none of this would have happened." Ethan froze. Her voice was barely audible. "My project could have changed everything." Then she smiled, not lovingly, regretfully. "Wasted my life." Those words struck harder than death itself. Ethan suddenly remembered all the times she had quietly mentioned returning to the laboratory. Every time she wanted to continue her pharmaceutical research, he had persuaded her otherwise. "You don't need to work anymore. Relax and enjoy life. I'll handle everything." At first, he thought he was protecting her, but over time, Willow transformed into someone unrecognizable, a luxury-addicted socialite constantly attending galas, fashion events, and elite parties. Meanwhile, Ethan worked himself into exhaustion trying to expand the company, and now, at the very end, she admitted the truth. She had once possessed the ability to save millions, to save him, to save the company. Tears filled Ethan's eyes, but before he could speak again, the monitor beside her emitted a sharp, continuous tone. Doctors rushed into the room. Someone pushed Ethan away. Voices echoed around him. Clear, pulse dropping, no response, but Ethan couldn't hear them anymore. His world had already ended. Then darkness swallowed everything. Mr. Carter, Mr. Carter. Ethan's eyes snapped open. Bright golden chandeliers hung above him. Luxury music played softly through a ballroom. He blinked repeatedly. His chest tightened. This place, the Grand Meridian Hotel, the engagement banquet, 3 years before Willow's death. Ethan looked down at his untouched champagne glass. Then toward the stage where Willow stood in a white dress beside her father. She was alive, young, healthy. The crowd applauded as both families prepared to announce the strategic marriage alliance between Carter Biotech and Liu Medical Group. Ethan's breathing became uneven. This wasn't a dream. He had returned, and suddenly, Willow's final words echoed through his mind again. "I wasted my life." A cold realization struck him. No, not this time. If Willow truly possessed the talent to revolutionize medicine, then marrying him had destroyed her future, and Ethan refused to repeat that mistake. The host smiled brightly. "Now, let us congratulate the future bride and groom. Cancel the engagement." The ballroom instantly fell silent. Dozens of guests turned toward Ethan in shock. Willow stared at him. "What?" Ethan slowly stood. His voice was calm. "I'm canceling the engagement." Gasps exploded throughout the room. Richard Liu's expression darkened immediately. "Ethan Carter," he said coldly. "This is not the place for jokes." "Not joking." Willow looked stunned, confused, hurt, but Ethan ignored the emotions clawing inside him, because in this life he was going to turn Willow Liu into the greatest scientist in the world, even if she hated him for it. The ballroom descended into chaos. Investors whispered furiously. Reporters rushed forward. Socialites exchanged shocked glances. The Carter and Liu families had spent months preparing this alliance. The merger between Carter Biotech and Liu Medical Group was expected to dominate the entire pharmaceutical industry, and Ethan had just destroyed it in less than 10 seconds. Willow stepped off the stage slowly. Her expression remained controlled. But Ethan noticed the slight tremble in her fingers. "You owe me an explanation," she said quietly, in his previous life. Ethan would have immediately comforted her, but now he knew kindness alone solved nothing. "You're wasting your talent." Willow frowned. "What? You graduated top of your class at Cambridge Biomedical Institute. Your professors called you a once-in-a-generation researcher." Ethan stared directly into her eyes. Why are you throwing that away for a business marriage? The room fell silent again. Richard Liu scoffed loudly. This is absurd. Willow has already decided to focus on family life after marriage. Ethan almost laughed. Family life? No. That path ended with regret and death. He looked at Willow. Do you actually want this for the first time? Uncertainty flickered across her face, and Ethan understood immediately. She never truly chose this life. Her family chose it for her. The Liu family had built an empire through hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and private medical investments. But despite their wealth, they lacked innovative research capable of competing globally. Willow's marriage to Ethan was designed to secure influence, not fulfill her ambitions. Richard Liu stepped forward angrily. You've embarrassed my daughter enough. Ethan ignored him instead. He pulled a contract from his jacket. If Willow agrees to join Carter Biotech's research division, Ethan announced publicly, I'll personally invest $200 million into her projects. The room erupted. Even Willow looked stunned. You would do that? Yes, but you just canceled the engagement. Correct. Why? Because you died regretting your life, because I lost everything, because your research could save millions. But Ethan only said, because your mind is worth more than a marriage alliance. For several seconds, Willow simply stared at him. Then Richard Liu exploded. This is manipulation. Ethan finally turned toward him. No. Manipulation is forcing your daughter into becoming a decorative trophy wife when she could become one of the greatest scientists alive. The accusation hit hard. Guests began whispering again. Willow lowered her eyes and Ethan saw it. Relief, tiny, almost invisible, but real. She whispered softly. If I join your company, I'll have complete research freedom. Yes, my own team. Yes, no interference from investors. I'll handle them. Willow looked around the ballroom filled with powerful businessmen pretending to care about innovation while chasing profits. Then she looked back at Ethan, and for the first time that night she smiled. Then I accept. Richard Liu nearly lost control. You can't be serious, but Willow's voice became firm. I spent years studying medicine because I wanted to change lives. She glanced at Ethan. Maybe he's the only person here who actually remembers. That Ethan's heartbeat slowed. This time, the future had already changed. 3 weeks later, Carter Biotech headquarters transformed into a battlefield. Executives argued nonstop. Board members accused Ethan of losing his mind. Investors threatened to withdraw funding. $200 million for an unproven researcher. One director shouted during the emergency meeting. Ethan sat calmly at the end of the conference table. She's not unproven. She has no commercial products. She has potential. The room burst into laughter. Potential didn't impress shareholders. Profits did. But Ethan already knew what Willow would eventually accomplish in his previous life. He had accidentally discovered fragments of her unfinished research after her death, a revolutionary immunotherapy capable of targeting a rare neurological disease that affected millions globally. Completed. It would reshape the pharmaceutical industry forever, and this time, Ethan intended to make sure the research succeeded. A board member leaned forward. You're gambling the company's future on one woman. Ethan's eyes turned cold. No, he slid several financial reports across the table. I'm saving this company from collapse. Silence followed because the numbers were horrifying. Carter Biotech's profits were shrinking. Competitors were overtaking them without a major breakthrough. Bankruptcy within 5 years was inevitable. Ethan knew that timeline perfectly. He had already lived it. Either trust me, he said quietly, or sell your shares and leave. No one spoke again. Meanwhile, inside the underground research division, Willow stared at the laboratory Ethan built specifically for her. State-of-the-art equipment, private funding, no outside supervision, everything she had secretly dreamed about. She slowly walked through the room, touching the polished steel counters. You really built all this in 3 weeks. Ethan stood behind her. I told you I was serious. Willow turned toward him suspiciously. I still don't understand. Why? You don't need to. That's not an answer. Ethan remained silent. How could he explain reincarnation without sounding insane? Willow crossed her arms. Most businessmen only care about profits. But you're investing hundreds of millions into research with no guarantee. Ethan looked directly at her. I know you'll succeed. Something about the certainty in his voice unsettled her, almost as if he had already seen the future. She quickly looked away. Fine, she muttered. Then don't interfere with my work. I won't. And if my project fails, it won't. Willow narrowed her eyes. You're strangely confident. Ethan almost smiled, because in his previous life, her unfinished notes alone were worth billions. Suddenly, an assistant rushed into the lab. Mr. Carter, he said nervously. Blackwell Pharmaceuticals just announced a competing neurological treatment. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. Blackwell, the company that destroyed him in his previous life, and standing behind it, Damian Blackwell, the man who stole Carter Biotech's investors, crushed their market shares and indirectly pushed Ethan toward ruin. This time, Ethan would not lose. He looked at Willow. How fast can you produce results? She raised an eyebrow confidently. Faster than your enemies expect. For the first time since his rebirth, Ethan genuinely felt hope. Damian Blackwell entered the charity gala like he owned the city. Tall, confident, and dangerously charismatic, he greeted politicians and investors with effortless charm. The media adored him, Wall Street admired him, and Ethan hated him in the previous life. Damian's company had destroyed Carter Biotech piece by piece until nothing remained. But tonight, Ethan noticed something different. Damian kept looking toward Willow. Interesting. Willow stood near the balcony, wearing a dark emerald dress that drew attention from nearly every man in the ballroom. Yet she seemed completely uninterested in the glamorous event. She looked bored. Damian approached her anyway. Dr. Liu, he said smoothly, offering a glass of wine. I've heard impressive things about your work. Willow accepted politely. Thank you. I also heard Ethan Carter is wasting your talents. Her expression sharpened slightly. Is that so? Damian smiled. Blackwell Pharmaceuticals values innovation much more seriously. From across the room, Ethan watched carefully. In his previous life, Willow never entered research, which meant Damian never targeted her. But now everything had changed, and Damian clearly recognized her value. Ethan walked toward them calmly, trying to recruit my lead scientist already. Damian laughed lightly. Competition keeps the industry healthy. No, Ethan replied coldly. Greed does. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Damian studied Ethan carefully. You've changed recently. So have you. Damian smirked. Then let's see which one of us adapts faster. He walked away. Willow watched him disappear into the crowd. He's dangerous, she said quietly. Yes, you sound certain. Ethan looked at the city skyline beyond the windows. Because I already know what he becomes. Willow leaned against the balcony. You know, she said thoughtfully. Most CEOs would panic if a rival approached their researcher. I trust you. That answer surprised even her. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? Because you were once my wife. Because I watched you die. Because despite everything, I still can't stop caring about you. But Ethan simply said, because unlike most people in this industry, you actually want to save lives. Willow's expression softened. For the first time, Ethan realized something unexpected in his previous life. They barely knew each other. They were married legally, but emotionally, they had been strangers. Now, working together instead of forcing a marriage, they were finally learning who the other person truly was, and that frightened him more than anything, because feelings were dangerous, especially when he remembered how her story originally ended. Suddenly Willow's phone vibrated. She checked the message, then her eyes widened. The trial worked. Ethan immediately focused. What? Our prototype treatment. She looked up at him excitedly. The neural regeneration response increased by 30%. Ethan's heartbeat accelerated. This result had appeared 2 years later in the previous timeline, which meant history was changing faster than expected. Willow smiled brightly. We may actually pull this off. Ethan stared at her, alive, brilliant, passionate. This was the woman she was always meant to become, and this time he would protect that future at any cost. The laboratory lights remained on past midnight. Willow sat surrounded by research papers, exhaustion visible beneath her eyes. Ethan entered quietly carrying 2 cups of coffee. You've been here 18 hours. She accepted the coffee without looking up. You counted. I own the building. Small smile appeared on her face. That alone surprised Ethan months ago. Willow barely tolerated him. Now they argued daily, shared meals during overnight research sessions, and occasionally laughed together. The distance between them had slowly disappeared, dangerously so. Willow leaned back in her chair. You know what's strange? What? You're completely different from the man everyone described. Ethan froze slightly. What do you mean? They said you were obsessed with profit, expansion, and reputation. She studied him carefully. But you spend more time worrying about my health than quarterly earnings. because I already know what happens when I focus on the wrong things. Ethan avoided her gaze. People exaggerate. No, she said softly. I think they misunderstood you. That sentence hit harder than expected, for years. Ethan believed he deserved his miserable ending. He thought greed destroyed his life, but maybe loneliness did. Willow suddenly pushed a file toward him. What's this? The projected patent. Valuation. Ethan opened it, then his eyes widened. The estimated value exceeded $6 billion, and that was only phase 1. You were right, Willow admitted quietly. This research can change the industry. Ethan looked at her seriously. No. You were always capable of this, for several seconds. Neither spoke. The silence between them became strangely intimate. Then Willow asked the question he feared most. Why did you really cancel the engagement? Ethan's chest tightened. Because I watched you die full of regret, because I couldn't save you, because I loved you too late. But none of those answers could be spoken. So he said quietly, because I didn't want you trapped in a life you hate. Willow stared at him, then slowly whispered, and if I would have chosen that life anyway. Ethan didn't answer, because the truth terrified him. If Willow had willingly chosen him before, then perhaps he had ruined. Both of them suddenly. Alarms sounded throughout the laboratory. An assistant rushed inside. Someone breached the research servers. Ethan stood instantly. What? They tried downloading project data remotely. Willow's face turned pale. Blackwell. Ethan's expression hardened. Damien had started moving earlier than expected, which meant the competition was no longer business, it was war. Cybertech shook Carter Biotech harder than any financial crisis. Investors panicked. Media outlets speculated that Carter's research division had become vulnerable. Meanwhile, Damien Blackwell publicly denied involvement while secretly expanding his neurological treatment program. Everything was escalating inside the laboratory. Willow slammed another folder onto the desk. We need higher security. We already upgraded everything, Ethan replied. Then someone on the inside leaked information. The possibility chilled the room. Corporate espionage was common in pharmaceuticals, but this project had become worth billions. People would kill for it. Ethan looked toward Willow. Until we identify the leak. You'll have personal security. She immediately frowned. Not a celebrity. More valuable than one. Willow rolled her eyes. You sound insane when you say things like that. Maybe he was, because every time danger approached her, memories of the hospital returned. The fear, the helplessness, the unbearable regret. He refused to relive it. Later that evening, Ethan reviewed financial projections alone in his office when someone knocked. Willow entered quietly. You're still working? She asked. So are you. She walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. The city lights reflected in her eyes. When I was younger, she said softly, I thought scientific discovery would feel glamorous, and now it feels lonely. Ethan understood that feeling perfectly. Success isolated people, especially ambitious ones. Willow turned toward him. You ever regret choosing this life? Every day. But he answered carefully. I regret the things I failed to protect. Her expression changed slightly, as if she sensed hidden pain beneath his words. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Canceling that engagement was probably the best thing anyone's ever done for me. Ethan's heartbeat stopped for half a second, because those words should have relieved him. Instead, they hurt, because part of him still wondered what their marriage could have become if things were different, if he had truly understood her, if she had followed her dreams, if time had been kinder. Willow stepped closer. Ethan, before she could continue. His phone rang. He answered immediately, then his expression darkened. What happened? Willow asked. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. One of our researchers disappeared. Silence filled the office. Then he added quietly, and Damien Blackwell just announced a breakthrough identical to ours. Someone had betrayed them. The emergency press conference exploded across global media. Damien Blackwell stood confidently before cameras, announcing a revolutionary neurological treatment that mirrored Carter Biotech's research almost perfectly. Stock prices surged instantly. Investors celebrated, and Ethan watched the broadcast. Complete silence. Willow stood beside him. Furious, he stole it. Yes, then sue him. We don't have enough proof yet. Willow clenched her fists. Years of research, months of sleepless nights, all threatened because of corporate theft. But unlike the previous timeline, Ethan remained calm, because he already knew Damien's greatest weakness, arrogance. 3 days later, Ethan arranged a private industry summit attended by pharmaceutical executives. Government regulators and major investors, Damien arrived smiling confidently. Planning damage control, he mocked. Ethan simply smiled back. No. An execution, Damien frowned slightly, inside the conference hall. Giant screens displayed Blackwell Pharmaceuticals, research timeline. Then Ethan activated the next slide. Internal metadata, server access records, encrypted payment transfers, every stolen file, every bribe, every illegal transaction. The room erupted. Damien's expression finally cracked. You hacked my company. No, Ethan replied calmly. Your lead researcher confessed. Willow stared at Ethan in shock. You found the mole 2 weeks ago. He had stayed silent intentionally because destroying Damien publicly mattered more than a quiet lawsuit. Regulators immediately launched investigations. Investors began leaving the room. Damien stepped toward Ethan furiously. You think this makes you a hero? Ethan's eyes turned ice cold. No. I think this makes you finished. Security escorted Damien away while reporters chased behind him. Blackwell Pharmaceuticals collapsed within 48 hours, and Carter Biotech's value skyrocketed. But later that night, Ethan sat alone in his office feeling strangely empty. He had finally defeated the man who ruined his previous life, so why didn't victory feel satisfying? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Willow entered holding 2 glasses of champagne. To surviving corporate warfare, she said. Ethan accepted the drink. Willow sat beside him quietly, then she asked, Are you ever going to tell me the truth? His chest tightened. What truth? The reason you act like you already know everything before it happens. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Then Ethan whispered, If I told you, you'd think I was insane. Willow looked directly into his eyes. Try me. And for the first time since his rebirth, Ethan seriously considered telling her everything. Rain poured against the windows as Ethan finally spoke. I've lived this life before. Willow blinked, then laughed softly, but Ethan didn't smile. Slowly her amusement disappeared. You're serious? Yes, he told her everything. The marriage, the company's collapse, her death, her final words, the unbearable regret that haunted him. Willow listened silently, without interruption. When he finished, the office remained completely quiet except for the rain outside. Finally, she whispered, So in your previous life we were married. Yes, and I died regretting everything. Ethan lowered his eyes. You deserved better. Willow stared at him for a long moment, then, unexpectedly, she moved closer. You idiot. Ethan looked confused. You carried this alone the entire time. I didn't know how to explain it. And you thought sacrificing your own happiness would fix everything. He frowned. What happiness? Willow smiled sadly. The part where you still loved me. Ethan froze because she was right. No matter how hard he tried to focus only on business and survival, his feelings never disappeared. Willow reached for his hand. In that other life, she said softly, we failed each other. Her fingers intertwined with his. But this isn't that life anymore. Ethan stared at her in silence for the first time. The crushing weight inside him began to disappear. Months later, Carter Biotech officially unveiled the completed neurological treatment. Global headlines called it the greatest pharmaceutical breakthrough of the decade. Millions of patients finally had hope. Willow became one of the most celebrated scientists in the world, and Ethan, for once, he stopped chasing endless expansion. Instead, he built something far more valuable, a life. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the city skyline, Willow leaned against his shoulder. So, she teased lightly, are you still planning to turn me into a corporate workhorse? Ethan laughed quietly. Maybe a part-time one. She smiled. You know what's funny? What? If you hadn't canceled the engagement, I probably never would have fallen in love with you. Ethan looked at her. And now? Willow kissed him gently. Now I'm choosing you myself. The city lights shimmered below them, not as symbols of ambition, but as proof that sometimes a second chance can save more than a company. Sometimes it can save a soul. And in this life, Ethan Carter finally understood something priceless. Success meant nothing if you had no one beside you to share it with. The end.